Greetings, dear listeners. Before we get started, a reminder to head on over to wisdomofcrowds.live and consider becoming a paying subscriber if you're not one yet. You'll get access to, among other things, the full conversation, as well as other subscriber-only benefits. And don't forget to give us a like and review on your favorite podcast app. With all that out of the way, on to the show. I think you and Santi grilled me last week, after you grilled me the week before, and then Santi grilled me the week before that. So I feel
now
grilled.
I need a grilling.
I feel grilled. I feel like I have griddle marks all over me. I need a I need to return the favor. But you know, I mean, it's I feel like it's challenging when you and I talk. You know, I'm actually impressed the extent to which you've managed to hold to this not going to get sucked into the news thing. Just given, I don't know, my life is now completely defined by it and ruled by it. It's a different experience of, I think, what it was like for me before, because the fire hose is also just like processing other people's work and making sure it's good and getting the right arguments. So it's not, I don't feel I feel like I'm engaging on it with a different level than if I was constantly having to like say something about it. But nevertheless, I don't know.
I'm basically
like
superhuman in that regard.
Yes. Divine in some sort of way. Right?
But look, it's also a problem, to be honest. I mean, I think that there's always this tension, like as a writer, that you have to follow the news at some level, and you have to be engaged and genuinely curious about what's happening around you. But you also have to be careful not to be sucked into the daily minutia that doesn't actually mean anything. And I think in the Trump era, it's hard to distinguish between meaningful and not meaningful things. And that's the challenge that we find ourselves in. How do you distinguish?
I mean, again, I think we can talk about different things, but it's a challenge this term because like the craziest stuff has a much longer shelf life than it would have before. You know, like just this week we had Jordan's King Abdullah visit, and he had to contend with the full Gaza relocation plan like insisted upon. You know,
it was painful to watch that.
I didn't watch it. I saw like write-ups and things like that. I didn't watch it. I can only imagine that, you know, how do you walk the line between not contradicting the emperor but not saying like we're on board?
yeah, exactly.
So, you know, it's that whole sort of idea, whether, you know, you should take Trump, how serious you should take him, and whether you should twitch at everything that he does, I feel like it doesn't quite hold the same water it might have in the first term. Like there was a lot more, there's probably a similar amount of flailing around. It's just that every flail this time lands a punch in a way it didn't last time. Do you know what I mean? Or at least most of them do somehow.
Yeah, okay, but does landing, the fact that it lands a punch, does that mean that we should be paying more attention to it? Like, what do you think are the implications of that? I guess that's what you're saying.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like, quite frankly, that takes up a good chunk of my day every day, is figuring out that question. And then what's worth it? Because there's only so many. I mean, that's what's really most striking about this. They've perfected somehow. I don't know. People are calling it flooding the zone or whatever. Just like just throwing everything at the wall in such a way, and some of it's sticking. I mean, maybe the real question is, and this is the question you're best placed to answer, is how much should a normal person care? You know, I mean. Clearly
okay, that I have strong opinions on. I don't have strong opinions about maybe what I should be doing and what I should be following, because I'm a unique case, you know?
Yeah. I mean,
but when it comes to like normies, I definitely have advice for people. I definitely think there's a better way to live.
Yeah.
And, unless you can actually affect change on certain topics, unless you're some sort of activist or you work for an NGO that deals with God knows what, or if you're a federal employee, then obviously it's very personal to you and you're directly implicated. But for the rest of us, I think the important thing is conserving our energy. Because I don't think we've seen anything yet that actually represents an existential threat to American democracy. And I know people will scrape me over the coals, whatever the saying is, for, oh, like Shadi's being blasé. Oh, he's not taking the threat seriously. But no, I still have full faith in American democracy. I don't think that fascism is upon us. And I don't think that kind of hyperbolic response is helpful, because I want to conserve my energy for when there's an actual constitutional crisis, and not just like oh, there's like this kind of gray area on a particular court order. No, if there's outright defiance of court orders at a kind of serious level that creates instability on the ground, that actually leads to civil conflict, or anything that makes me feel that the next election won't be free and fair and Democrats won't have a legitimate shot at winning. Those are the kinds of things I want to conserve my energy for. Now, it's hard to know when that moment comes. Like, that's always the challenge here, is will you know it when you're in it?
That's it. A colleague was sort of saying that this morning in one of these interminable debates about, is this worth it? Is it a crisis? Is it not? And it's the boiling the frog sort of thing, Is it that every one of these little, blows that are landed just desensitizes us further and then stretches the limits of what's possible, shifts the Overton window of what's acceptable and what, raises the dander of people or not. And, at what point have you crossed that line? The counter is, of course, is that if you're, trying to rekindle the resistance fires, you're already being ignored because people are like, saw this already. Hitler's here. He hasn't yet rounded up the Jews. What's going on? Like, I think you're maybe lying. You're overstating. You're being dramatic. And that's the problem, is that, it's, you can overdo it as well, right? And how do you get that sweet spot of figuring out when is the time to start crying fire, Yeah,
well, I think for me, part of it is that I don't see any plausible scenario in which dictatorship is possible. I think America is too big for authoritarianism.
But let's distinguish the dictatorship from authoritarianism, right? I mean, it's not the same thing.
Yeah, but we already know that Trump has authoritarian leanings and he governs in an authoritarian manner.
Right.
I think this is where words matter. I think it's one thing to say, oh, he's an authoritarian personality, which I think he is.
Yeah.
Versus he's going to make America into a non-democracy, or we will no longer be a democracy. Because that was always the claim.
But what about
from Biden and Kamala Harris and other Democrats, is that democracy was on the ballot. So that's what I'm more concerned with.
But okay, I mean, this is good. You're a democracy scholar. Now we have a lot to talk about. But it is because these terms are so, both loaded, have been overused, misused, but also, yeah, I mean, it's murky, right? I was talking to a mutual friend of ours about this, actually, and I was saying, okay, what Trump is doing with a lot of this court stuff is playing hardball with Congress. And at the end of it, we may have a new constitutional order where Congress is greatly diminished and just doesn't matter that much anymore, sort of like a rubber stamp Congress, right? It is important to remember that, the Roman Senate persisted into the empire as sort of this like rubber stamp thing.
But the margin in the House and the Senate is too narrow for that to actually be the case.
No. But again, like what the worry is the following, right? Is that it's not about the Senate will stay Republican forever, or the House will stay Republican forever. It's not that it won't be contested. It's that all its meaningful powers will be stripped away sooner rather than later. So, in the sense, well, meaningful powers, they could still pass bills, passing laws and things like that. But the extent to which their powers will be circumscribed and their capacity to check the executive will be completely sort of hollowed out, right? And you're seeing that basically. And again, I'm not sure I have like a very strong opinion on this. I'm not sure. I don't think that some rebalancing is in order, that the executive actually does end up being somewhat stronger. But how much is too strong? Well, look, and the question, the question is, and this is just this is what I want to just end with you and put this to you, because this is what our friend said. He said, well, what if we have a plebiscitary democracy where only the election for the president really matters, and you have a rubber stamp Congress that doesn't really play a role? So basically representation goes away as a means. You still have something like an elective monarchy that, cycles presumably maybe between two parties, but we'll see, probably not easily between two parties when it's like centered so much on the executive. I don't know. It becomes harder. But then again, I don't know. I don't know even what the parallels for this sort of stuff are, what the models are.
I'd say that doesn't have necessarily direct implications for whether or not we're a democracy, because there are many democracies that have more of this kind of elected dictatorship model, that there isn't really checks and balances in the way that we have them here in the US, that there isn't the same kind of separation of powers. I mean, if you think about the Westminster system, I mean, Britain generally, like if there's a prime minister who has a large majority in parliament, he can then that party can pretty much do whatever it wants, because there is a tradition of a party line vote. I mean, that's why it's called a party line vote. Now, on certain issues of conscience that implicate religious beliefs, sometimes backbenchers will get the notice that they can vote their conscience, and that's what happened recently with the vote on assisted dying, that it wasn't a party line vote because party leaders understood that for some people it's a religious question. So, I mean, but there are a lot of democracies that basically operate in this way. Is that good? No, it's not my preference. I mean, my preference is generally to decentralize power and to distribute power away from the core, because I am suspicious of concentrations of power. Now, I think normally Republicans would be suspicious of concentrations of power if they were the ones in the opposition. But of course,
we're well past that. Right?
Yeah, I know. But I'm just saying, like, everyone's against the concentration of power when they're in
out
the
of
opposition.
When they're out of power. No, I mean, right. But we're well past that. I mean, normally Republicans would be. Normally Democrats would be. And Democrats are now. They won't be in 4 or 8 years if they get back. I mean, like, again, Biden also exercised the powers that were bequeathed to him in the precedent that was given to him before. Obama did a lot with executive orders. You know what I mean? Like, again, we're on a spiral here. This has been clear for a while. But, I mean, that's interesting to hear you say that. I mean, that's very important, I think, and I think something I can line up with, even though it still gives me a little bit of disquiet, which is to say that, again, the most, I do think, because this is probably the most likely outcome of 4 years of Trump, I'm sure there'll be more overreach and crazy stuff happen, but like, I think the likeliest outcome is that if he, as he has said, chooses to abide by the Supreme Court's final rulings, the Supreme Court will carve out a very powerful executive out of this, will limit him probably on things like impoundment, which is that thing that he'll have to spend the money that Congress allocates to him. He won't be able to like not spend it. So there'll still be some like small check there. I think the smart people are saying that things like the birthright citizenship, that's going to get overturned as well. Yeah. But like everything else, where he is like where executive power comes in conflict with the legislature, the executive will win. So you just have like an even more hyper-presidential system and a more vestigial representative body. And hearing you say it, like, maybe it's not your preference, but it's not the end of the world. Fair?
It's certainly not the end of the world. It's
you know
not
what
the
I mean.
end of, yeah. I mean, it's not the end of democracy. I'm just saying, I also have a minimalist conception of democracy, which we've talked about on the pod before. Other scholars of democracy have a thicker conception that includes more of these robust checks and balances, that there's a liberal component that is baked in a very serious way. That's a longer debate, and we've had it before. I differ with that scholarly approach.
No, but the reason I think it is interesting to have it now, or at least like rehash part of it now, is because I think you've wielded that minimal democracy in terms of democracy promotion. So if we're going to have a successful democracy promotion agenda abroad, we need to rid ourselves of all of these extra trappings. But you've often said that domestically you're a liberal Democrat. Like you're not really satisfied with the minimal conception of democracy at home. Like you like the thicker stuff.
But it's more of a preference than a demand. Like it's not a requirement.
Yeah.
For America to be a democracy, it needs to be a liberal democracy. I'd never go that far. Is it a preference of mine? I'd rather live under a liberal democracy that has robust separation of powers and checks and balances. But then again, like my side lost, and the other side doesn't have the same commitments that I do. They don't seem to like checks and balances the way that I do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at some level, elections have consequences. But the other thing that I would say, here's a complicating factor. I have to be careful about how I say this. I have some sympathies. Look, it's not sympathy. I get what Trump is doing, and I understand the theory of the case.
Yep. Me too.
They believe the system is fundamentally broken. And honestly, for probably a majority, it's not even probably, certainly for a majority of Americans, the system is broken.
I would contest that, right? But anyway, because that is a broad claim.
But the
like
fact
how do you even poll that, right? Like the system.
The fact
is
that Trump
broken.
has like a clear majority approval rating now.
Partisans will say it's not that big, so It's
but whatever it is,
bigger
it's like
than 2016.
It's like 55% or 57%.
Oh, the approval rating. Sorry, you're right. The approval rating. Sorry, I didn't mean.
I think anyone who approves of Trump right now is generally okay with disrupting the system and probably doesn't have a very positive view of the system as it stands. I just don't see how you can support Trump but also be an institutionalist at this point.
Yeah.
So, look, I think that it's hard to argue this because, let's just be honest, I am one of the beneficiaries of the system as it stood before Trump.
Yeah.
It works for people like me.
Yep.
I like it. I'd rather, but at some level I have to acknowledge that I'm well educated, maybe even hyper educated, over educated, whatever adjective. Over, like this is, it's worked out pretty well for me. I have financial security. I actually like America as it is. I think America is already great. But I say that from a position of privilege, to use that terminology. I am privileged in that sense. And I think, unfortunately, the Democratic Party became the party of the privileged class. And I am a member of that class. So obviously I like the status quo, and I don't want it to end, obviously. But what is the saying? Where we stand depends on where we sit. Or maybe it's the other way around.
One way or the other.
One way or the other.
Yeah.
But for a lot of Americans, and we can differ on like how many of these Americans there actually are, but it's a lot of them, this system wasn't working for them. And they were willing to disrupt everything. They were willing to take a real bet with Donald Trump and just break things, go a bull in the china shop, and just like be a destructive force. They don't know what will be rebuilt in the place of that destruction, but they hate the system so much. They think the system has failed so much for people like them that they're like, we'll give Trump a chance. We don't know exactly what he'll do. We won't approve of a lot of the stuff he does. But you know what? It has to be broken down, this status quo. Look, I get it. And honestly, I don't even have an argument against it.
Mm-hmm.
I get, like, that's reasonable, right? If you're coming from a place where you feel that things haven't worked for you, why not take your chance with Trump? That's the argument, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I feel you, as the saying goes, but I guess I have a different, idea about the sovereignty of voters. That is to say, I don't take it that seriously. I think it's more like you have, isn't it a better way to look at elections as, almost like retroactively, like dislike, so sort of a referendum on past performance and presumably some contrast you're getting with the other person, but it's not necessarily automatically signing on to like everything that's been done. I mean, ultimately,
not, yeah.
right? Like the actual check on Trump comes in 2 years in the midterms, and then in 4 years in the general.
Yes,
so,
and voters can signal how
but
comfortable.
So all I'm getting at is like there's always this what's it called? Like a time lag in democracies, and I think the Trump folks, if not Trump himself, have figured this out, and that's why they're going all hard, because they know they have a window. Like even if voters turn on them badly, I mean, if they turn really badly, I guess they'll probably react. But the idea here is to sort of show vigor, to be like energetic, and just get as much done as possible before people really can even start asking the kind of questions. Because to be fair, like the part where I thought you were going with this, rather than this sort of, anguished, confess your privilege thing, is that this is how bureaucracies defend themselves. And I think this is where I have a lot of sort of at least understanding of what the Trump folks are doing. I think it's much more resentment based. And I do think probably, Trump voters, the ones that really care, are voting out of resentment. I think it's resentment against Democrats. It's not really an idea of the system is broken for me. It's that it's populated by those people over there. And it's time to hurt them. And you have an ability to just basically, whack at them really hard. There's a knowledge that if you have debates over these things on the merits, this is how bureaucracies absolutely gum up the system, absolutely gum up reforms. And this is not just governments. This is corporations and things like that. People who are in jobs tend to want to be in those jobs, know those jobs, can justify those jobs, and make all sorts of cases why the status quo is as it should be. So reform is very hard. Something on the scale of the federal bureaucracy, with all its thickets of entrenched interests and all the rest of that, it becomes very hard. So I think you've got two things going on from where I'm sitting, and again, which I can understand, both Trump voters with their resentments and Trump and his team with what they're doing. It's to smash things. It's to smash things that have the faintest stench of Democrat on them. And that's what they're doing.
And it invites the question, why do they hate us?
Okay.
Why do they hate us so much? I think it's an interesting question that's worth reflecting on. Like, clearly we did things to turn so much of the country against us. And this is not hyperbole either. The Democratic Party has its lowest approval ratings basically according to some polls in recorded history, since they've started polling favorability ratings, certain polling outfits. Like, this is not just very low, but lowest of the low. So it's around like in the low 30s approval rating. I've seen some polls, it hovers between 30 and 35% approval rating. For a party in a divided country, a country that we thought was 50-50, for Democrats to have less than a third, barely a third of support from the American public, I mean, that really tells you something.
Someone said this to me. Did you, have you heard this? Maybe you said it to me. Someone said it to me that Democrats or Republicans are +10 among young voters now.
Yeah, in the CBS News poll, it's something like that.
That's
actually
crazy.
Yeah. I think
so
out of
crazy.
all the age brackets, Republicans do best with the under 30 demographic, which is, it is really remarkable because for reasons that we've talked about, the whole saying that if you have a heart and you're under 30, you have to be like a socialist or a leftist or whatever. So to see the one demographic, and remember just a few years ago, all the talk was about how demography is destiny, and young people are so staunchly liberal that this is going to doom Republicans for generations to come. And we've just seen that
first
flip.
it was brown people, now it's young people.
Exactly.
This is always the future, and they've lost both futures.
I'd love to see a gender breakdown because my suspicion is that it's very lopsided. That it's young men who are just driving this to an incredible degree, which gets at the whole like ideological dating mismatch and how that contributes to our marriage crisis as a country.
But we should look into it. I wouldn't be surprised that it's not as lopsided as all that. Like I'd be surprised if it's something like 70-30, maybe like 60-40, but I'd say maybe even probably like 55-45. I don't think women love Democrats either, young women.
But they don't love Trump. Keep in mind, though, that young women are disproportionately concerned with issues around
abortion
and so forth. So, but we should look into that and actually try to get the numbers on that. But
so, just coming back to it then, because right now as we're recording this, we're in the midst of this talk of the constitutional crisis, or as our colleague Jason Willett called it, constitutional panic, i.e. not really a crisis but a panic, like a moral panic. It's interesting to think that what really is probably the most realistic outcome, which is a constitutional reordering of the kind of, not like just basically, as I was saying, a real shift towards presidentialism, actually shouldn't concern us. We may not like it. We may want to go different ways, but if that's what we end up with, we're still a democracy. So this idea of death of democracy should not be invoked on something that.
Okay, no, well, it should concern us. I just don't think it's a question. It's not a binary question of is America a democracy or not. Like that's one set of questions.
Yeah.
I don't think we should panic about, oh my God, America will cease to be a democracy. But within the context of democratic competition, we can be very concerned about things that fall short of a legitimate authoritarian threat. Not everything has to be about authoritarianism. We can still be very concerned about other things.
But so an authoritarian, plebiscitary, elective monarchy with, that, I mean, I guess the main thing you're talking about is as long as Democrats can get that monarchy every so often, it's fine.
Yes, but Democrats will never use the
No, come on.
No, Democrats just don't have the same gumption that Republicans do. They care too much about norms.
No. Hold on a second. Well, see, this is interesting. This, I think, is very much is where
Democrats
you sit, is where you stand, sort of stuff.
They're not fighters.
Do you know that Biden, again? This is I keep bringing this up again. I keep getting reminded of this by conservatives. Biden threatened the Supreme Court over the student loan stuff. And then basically ignored their ruling and tried to with another sort of, move, get around it and had to get smacked down again by the Supreme Court.
Well, he got smacked down. I mean,
twice. But after the first time, he was just like, this is, who are these people, these corrupt, whatever. I mean, he was slandering the Supreme Court a lot. And remember, there was a lot of stuff about, at the time going around about, how corrupt they are and how they're taking bribes from rich people and all the rest of that.
But a lot of it was rhetoric. A lot of it was rhetoric. It didn't lead to a constitutional panic. I don't remember that.
Well, no. I mean, it was pointed out by conservatives. It didn't lead to a constitutional panic because our paper and other papers didn't take it seriously. They were like, no, this is just Biden. This is just Biden fighting for the little guy, for the students, the poor kids, So it's how can it be a constitutional crisis if he's fighting for the good against the evil? But that's nonsense. That's a dumb way to think about it.
Maybe on one issue, yes. Certainly, I don't doubt the Democrats have have.
No, so all I'm saying is your claim is Democrats would never. I think that's nonsense.
They'd never be like Trump. You'd never see a Democratic equivalent of Trump's first 3 weeks in office. Can you imagine a Democrat flooding the zone and just sowing chaos?
Because I think they've learned a lot. I could see Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez coming into power and being like, hey, we learned some great stuff from these guys. And you know what we got to do? We got to go gut the corporations. We got to change the tax code super quickly. We got to nationalize a bunch of stuff. And let's just throw everything at the wall and let's see what happens. Why the hell wouldn't they do that? This is exactly what they're learning. This is a learning process after all, because this idea that, because I'm pushing back, you're still stuck in this idea that Democrats are virtuous and therefore weak, or weak and therefore virtuous. One way or the other, maybe both.
They're proceduralists still. They care about procedural integrity.
I don't think that's true. I think they play hardball just as well.
Maybe not the progressive wing of the party, but the mainstream of the Democratic Party. You even see this now. They're not really. They don't have a lot of energy.
They shivved Bernie really hard. Really hard in 2016. Now, okay, procedurally, sure, they played by the rules that they set up, and then they basically knifed
within
him.
The party. I mean, parties oftentimes like gut opposition they don't like. The party decides all of that. I think it's different when we're looking at governing an entire country over governing a party.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure how that's measured. From where I'm sitting, it does feel like, I keep coming back to this, that it's just sort of like a spiral we're heading down. And then
look, I just see Democrats as softies in part because I know a lot of Democrats and I know what they're like. These are not people with a lot of spine. They're careerists. They're technocrats. They're experts. They're analysts.
To be fair, this is the first time that like a real, non-careerist cadre of Republicans has come in. Right. I mean, that's Trump's gift.
But I don't think do we have something like that in the Democratic Party?
Again, I'm pointing to, because the closest thing that could have happened to the Democratic Party that didn't is that Bernie took over in 2016. Had he been that, I think he would have brought in a bunch of like non-credentialed economists, like kooks and people with access to grind, a bunch of communists in, and like it would have done his thing. Again, elections have consequences.
But would that have led to a constitutional panic? I feel like with economic policy type stuff,
you don't think he would have gone after corporations in a big way and like,
is that illegal though?
I mean, depends.
Is it unconstitutional to go after corporations? I just feel like we're talking about a different class of political
no, I guess that's fair.
Here.
I guess that's fair.
Like what Trump is doing, and I think Tyler Cohen's piece on Trumpism as cultural policy, we can include a link to that in the show notes. It's really an excellent piece that gets at something really important, which is Trump in flooding the zone with these executive orders. He's not actually interested in policy. And we talked a little bit about this in the previous episode.
Yeah.
He's interested in shifting the Overton window.
Yep.
He wants to do something to the culture, and these executive orders are a means to an end. It's not about the policy content itself. It's not about substance. It's about sending messages to the country about what is culturally acceptable or not acceptable.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
I agree with that. No, I agree with that. I mean, I thought, I did read it. That is a really good piece. I mean, I guess the part that I don't know. It's always terms in this sort of stuff, like culture. Culture is one way to put it. The other way is just sort of, I don't know. Is it politeness? Is it just like a shifting towards, I don't know, a more aggressive posture and trying to sort of normalize aggressiveness? I mean, is that culture? That's why like all these like vibe shift sort of stories still don't really sit right with me, because I feel like those terms, like when you talk about culture, you start talking about bigger things, and I think Tyler gets it right. I'm not comfortable with that he calls it culture. Yeah. I think I agree with what he's laying out there, because it's more like animal spirits, to coin that, to use that economic term. It's injecting a certain kind of ether, like changing the air to the just mood. Sort of. Not the mood. It's more it's more like a drug. You know what I mean? Like it's like injecting something into the bloodstream. Like I think he does he use it sort of as a metaphor, saying, this kind of like sclerotic sort of thing? So imagine like a patient that's sort of drifting away into senescence, and like what Trump seems to be doing is just like giving him a shot of adrenaline, right? That'll just make him aggressive and try and like revive certain kind of youth and vigor in the patient. I think that's how I would characterize what Tyler's getting at more than culture.
But he
but
uses the
whatever.
word culture repeatedly.
I know. I'm just saying that's what trips me up about it. I agree with what I think he's getting at. That word I don't like, but
I think he's using it more in terms of. Yeah, animal spirits is actually a pretty good way of putting it.
Yeah,
I like that actually.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I mean, it's I think
I'll just quote something from the piece because I think that this sort of gets at what at this kind of deeper about here. So he says, quote, "Okay, this is him. Yeah, this is him writing. Okay, so how might you fix the culture of America? You want to tell everyone that America comes first, that America should be more masculine and less soft, that we need to build, that we should own the libs." Like that's sort of like what. So that's I think what he means by culture, like way of.
Yeah. But go. I think it's the next paragraph talks about USAID. I thought that was a really good one. It's like basically it's like attack all the institutions that encourage that kind of soft, positive,
here's
some womanly approach. Basically, is what he seems to be saying.
Here we go. Quote: "How is that war against U.S. aid going? Will it be abolished, cut off from the Treasury payment system, simply rolled up into the State Department? I do not know. Perhaps nobody knows, not yet. The point, however, is to delegitimize what U.S. aid stands for, which the Trumpers perceive as other countries first, and a certain kind of altruism, and a certain kind of NGO left-leaning mindset and lifestyle," end quote.
I think that's perfect. That sentence to me
captures it.
That captures it exactly. It's to delegitimize an entire cosmopolitan universalist worldview. That's at the core of this. And again,
which you're sympathetic to.
I'm very sympathetic to it. I'm very, very sympathetic to it, even though I'm very conflicted about what wrecking the machinery of our empire like this entails and what the consequences of it will be. I'm very sympathetic to at least the instinct of what they're doing. And again, like I said earlier, I'm also very sympathetic of the fact that this idea, I think it was Matt Continetti a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, tweeted, said, "Oh, all of us are for streamlining and making government better, but oh, heavens to Betsy, you can't do it like this. You must do it and have studied he didn't say technocratic approach, but that's what he was getting at. Like a technocratic approach to reforming the bureaucracy. Good luck. Good luck, my friend.
Good luck.
Not going to happen. The only way, but it's a very dangerous way, and I think we're going to find out exactly how dangerous it is what these guys are doing, is smashing it, ruining also a bunch of lives. I just want to also, like, I hasten to add that all the time because I know you do.
People
we have just like a lot of friends that are freaking losing jobs right now. It's not a laughing matter. But again, as you said yourself, we're a class of people, and in a city populated by a class of people, and so we're the big losers of this. Many people lose all the time. Yeah,
there was a meme going around that captures some of this. I'll just share it. So the meme, and we'll include a link to this in the show notes, maybe even like the image itself, maybe. But basically, it's there's these two guys on a bus, and on one side of the bus, the guy is like looking out the window. And he looks so despondent and sad, and he's just staring at like rocks.
Oh yeah, I've seen this one.
Yeah, and that side is the system is collapsing, and then the other side of the bus, the guy is looking out into the sun and smiling with anticipation, and it also says the system is collapsing.
Yeah.
That is what is happening, and it really comes down to how you perceive the relative goodness or badness of the system collapsing. So what I said on Twitter was, I said something positive about the meme because I thought it captured something important. And then I said, and then there's the rest of us who have mixed feelings about the system. Like I'm somewhere in the aisle, right in between them. I kind of like the system. It works for me, but I also get that the system has serious structural problems. And then David Polanski, frequent Wisdom of Crowds contributor, responded in a way that I thought was like pretty compelling. He said this, quote, "It really just comes down to one question, or to the question. Am I or those I care about within the blast radius when this thing goes off?"
Yep.
It's very personal. Do you have
Yep.
friends and family, you yourself? Are you going to be affected when the system is destroyed?
Yep.
And are you going to be caught in the blast radius?
Yep. It's the other way to look at that meme, that cartoon is one of optimism though too, right? Is that when you see it and crumble, you're like, oh, we'll clearly build something better. I don't think that's necessarily clearly true at all.
Yeah.
Not so. It's almost looking at it as competing bads. Is it like you smash something crappy and you're left with nothing, as opposed to an opportunity to build something better? Now, again, I mean, the Silicon Valley mindset is, of course, we'll build something better. There's another something someone mentioned as well recently that caught my ear. The other part about which I think has to drive Elon Musk absolutely insane is how backwards government is. Their tech systems, and I think they've finally gotten rid of Windows 98 or whatever the hell they were using until
right.
But still, like it's very hidebound, very bad. I mean, you hear these stories about these systems that they're mucking around with in Treasury that are running on like 1960s code and whatever else. And okay, like a lot of large companies have that, like airline, traffic controllers and like ticketing systems are still running on outdated, really ancient code bases. But when you think about efficiency and you think about how any job can be done better if you just sort of adopt some of the modern niceties, like Germany's an incredible case. I think we can again put it in the show notes. There was an essay by one of our columnists, Lee Hochstadter, earlier this week about Germany's upcoming elections, and in part of the essay it just details how many businesses still use fax machines in Germany, for example. Like digitalization is so far behind over there. And insofar as our government is like that, and insofar as you want to get better, one thing you may want to do is actually thin the herd so much that it becomes really hard for the remaining people to do their job unless they adopt a lot of time-saving technologies. And then there's a real impetus to modernize. If you have an unfireable and incredibly bloated workforce that's like through inertia grows and grows, I think you just sort of start delegating jobs, like meaningless jobs, to people. I think this is part of what they're seeing in there.
Yeah. So there will be some good that comes out of this.
Maybe. No, I'm not
Possibly.
I'm not claiming that that's the case. I think you could still very much throw the baby out with the bathwater. What's that expression? But like,
yeah, exactly. But isn't that what we learned with Twitter as well? That you can fire like 90% of the staff, and maybe the
70,
quality
I think
of
it was. Yeah.
70, yeah. Maybe the quality of the product isn't 100% the way it was before, but you're cutting but it's not a 70% drop in quality. You can actually do without a lot of those people. A lot of them are redundant.
Yeah.
I don't know if that applies in quite the same way to government, but probably to some extent there are redundant people or people who don't work particularly hard, people who are very hard to fire, people who are doing like some weird DEI stuff that actually is not useful and doesn't contribute to anyone's well-being. Like there are people that you don't need to have in the federal workforce.
I think I said this on a previous episode. If not, I'll say it now. Again, so many good conversations this time of Trump. So people are just like coming up with great quips. But this quip was it's like most normies when they like see a government shutdown happen, and then they read about non-essential employees being furloughed for like weeks at a time. They're like, "What's a non-essential employee in the government? If they're not essential."
That's actually a really good point.
And it's just like, wow, okay. There's like, and then we write articles about tens of thousands of, non-essential employees furloughed without pay. Oh, how terrible. And you're like, tens of thousands of non-essential people that will come back to getting their paycheck. And again, I think if you're not in these blue professional cities, and certainly not in the heart of the empire here, where the bureaucracy is so concentrated, and you're not feeding off of it, you're far away, and you just sort of see this, and you're like, wait, tax dollars? What? Non-essential federal worker. Anyway.
And if we're still talking about 2 million or so like federal employees, if you're cutting out 65 or 70,000 of them, we're still talking about a relatively small percentage of their overall federal workforce. I think it's also just worth keeping some of this in its appropriate perspective.
Yeah, well, not clear how many he actually wants to do. I mean, that executive order that came out this week.
That number will keep on growing, but I'm just saying we're unlikely to get to a point where you're cutting 70, like that's just impossible. 70% of the federal workforce, like that's not what we're talking about here.
I'm done saying things like impossible after the annexation of Greenland and the plan for Gaza.
You still need to like run shit. Like at some basic level, Trump doesn't want like all this talk about gutting the government. They still have interests. They still have things they want to accomplish. They still have ideological objectives, and you need a workforce to actually get certain things done if you want them to get done.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, I agree. I just wonder, how, especially since they're rushing, since the Silicon Valley motto is move fast and break things, since they assume that, they can build back better, to coin a term again, after the rubble has sort of settled, and maybe they're wrong about that. You know what I mean? Like, it's happening so fast. I don't, they've done planning. Clearly they've done some planning, but how carefully they've done that planning and how excited they can get at the momentum and go too far and do things that maybe it shouldn't be done. Again, I'm with you in that middle aisle, not knowing which way to look, left or right.
It's an odd place to be, though. I have to say that's going to put us in a challenging position. And maybe that's fine. We can handle that.
Yeah.
But I think most of the people I see around me are people who are on either side of the bus, people who are just like joyous. They're celebrating. These are like the right-wing folks who descended upon Washington, and some of whom I hung out with, as we discussed in last time around. Like, they are just giddy with excitement. And then there are people who really think that this is the end.
Yeah.
But then there's the rest of us. And I would actually, I'm curious, I think we're a pretty big, faction in this, but because we don't really have a clear, ideologically coherent position. We gather a lot of people from all over the spectrum. It's hard for us to have a lot of political effectiveness, the people in the aisle. Maybe there's just we're the aisle, the party of the aisle.
Yeah.
Is that a saying? But maybe
that's
who we are.
That's a good one. Well, look, again, I remain excited, as I keep saying on this. You know what I mean? I think it's a time for it's a time to do big things. And by that I don't mean wreck everything. But
So
this wrecking. No, I think this wrecking ball will just clear a lot of space from a lot of, again, orthodoxies. I still stick to it, is that I'm not sure the Democrats are there yet, so I don't think the discussion on the left is going to be that productive. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. You're plugged into that more. Maybe let's just sort of talk about that a little bit. Is your sense of the discussion on the left and Democrats, mostly Democrats? Let's not talk about the intellectual left so much. Do you get a sense that there's any kind of momentum towards anything? That's it for part one, dear listeners. There's a lot more where that came from. If you're not yet a paying subscriber, please head on over to wisdomofcrowds.live and become one. Help support our work. Hope to see you in the bonus.